Hello, America, and welcome to Pivot Point, a show bringing you diverse views on the news. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore. Well, we have another situation with gun violence. A mass shooting at the Washington Navy Yard actually killed 12 Americans at a secure U.S. naval constellation. And they're saying that the perpetrator, a man named Aaron Alexis, was actually suffering from mental health issues. Here today to talk about this and other issues, we are joined first by Annie Weinberg. She is with the Progressive Congress. Welcome, Annie.
Hi, Maya. Thanks for having me on the show.
So here we are again, Annie. And yet, I turned on the news this morning and people are actually criticizing the president for not responding appropriately to the shooting. What needs to happen? We've had this conversation. We had it around the shootings of the 20 children at the school in Connecticut. We had it when we had the shooting at the theater in Colorado. It just seems to never end. What needs to happen, Annie?
Well, I think there have been lots of pushes in the aftermath of some of these tragic shootings to actually create some kind of gun violence legislation at the federal level, and I think that that is something that we really need to look at. How we regulate some of these incredibly dangerous weapons to keep people safe.
And is there a mental health component? Is Progressive Congress actually prioritizing this at all?
I think our biggest priorities are around really reinvesting in jobs and making sure that the economic hardships that so many people are going through are addressed. However, there's definitely a mental health component. There's a healthcare component to it. When people don't have access to adequate healthcare and adequate mental health care, these problems grow. Absolutely.
So in this case, we had a gentleman who was actually a veteran, and he had access to the VA health benefits and was taking advantage of them. And so, here we are yet again experiencing a challenge with gun violence and seemingly having no systems to protect people in public places, even at work sites, even on supposedly secure governmental installations, military installations. And so the president has called for a review of security on all installations. There was some indication that the security was lax because there had been cutbacks due to sequestration. So this might be evidence of another situation where sequestration has lowered our ability to provide the services that we need to provide. So Annie, what are you prioritizing now at Progressive Congress?
So right now at Progressive Congress, we are very excited about the outpouring of organizing around low-wage workers and their right to organize, their right to have a decent living wage. So we're partnering with a host of our friends in the labor movement. And you probably have seen over the summer there's been a wave of strikes, a wave of workers taking to the streets to ask their management, to ask their local and state officials for better living wages. So we're very excited to partner with these workers to do that. And we have members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus who've traveled all over the country trying to push for better wages for working families, for fast food and retail. So that's really been an exciting development.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it has been an exciting development to see, McDonald's workers and Burger King workers and just really kind of rising up and saying that, we need better working conditions, we need better pay. I have to raise the issue of what happened in Washington, D.C. The mayor, Mayor Vincent Gray, actually vetoed a city council piece of legislation that would have demanded that Walmart, one of the largest employers of low-wage workers in the United States, actually provide a living wage at $12.50 an hour, and the mayor vetoed it. What's your reaction to that?
I think that it is awful that the mayor vetoed something that is clearly so instrumental to getting an economy back on track that works for everybody. So there has been this trend towards creating any kind of job, right? But you can't survive on $7.25. That's what the poster say, that I flipped the chance say, if we're creating lots of jobs that don't actually allow families to make ends meet, that's not about a stable recovery. That's not actually long-term growth for our communities. So we need to reinvest and prioritize jobs that actually pay people a decent living wage. And I think this Walmart case is a great example of that. We have so many stories of Walmart workers not receiving any sick pay, working under very difficult and often unsafe working conditions. And that's not the kind of job that's going to get our economy back on track.
So last week in the Washington Post, there was an article talking about that Walmart, in not just workers, but the people who actually patronize Walmart depend on those low prices. And the pushback from industry was that we actually serve low-income people with our affordable pricing. And this is our model, that we serve low-wage people so that they can have affordable products, and we happen to provide low-wage wages to our workers at the same time. What is the pushback on that kind of argument?
Well, there's no doubt that the cost of living is rising, and that's related to some of the great work that you've done on Social Security fights. I think that's why the teen CPI fight is so important. The cost of living is rising in this country, and that's something that we need to address. But the way to lift all boats in this scenario is to create enough jobs, especially in some of these areas with rising, devastating amounts of unemployment, so that people actually have the money to buy these goods. Because even with these low prices for products, it's still nearly impossible to make ends meet on the wages that Walmart and McDonald's and Burger King and some of these fast food industry giants are paying people.
So have there been any policy wins as a result of the actions taking place?
Well, there is actually a very exciting development. So one of the interesting pieces of this is that this also includes some of the federal workers, the workers in federal buildings who work at some of these outlets like McDonald's or Obam's and things like that. These are workers in federal buildings, and there is a law that says that workers inside of federal buildings should actually receive a prevailing wage. There is an exemption for that, and so a lot of these workers, over 2 million workers around the country who are in our federal buildings, Union Station, the Ronald Reagan buildings, aren't receiving a fair wage. So there's been an incredible push from members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and now there's a Senate-side version of this push as well, to end that exemption. So this would immediately give over 2 million workers around the country a raise. It's not everything, but it is a big start. And if the president can do it, he can sign it with the stroke of a pen, with an executive order. So there's been a lot of movement around that, a lot of organizing, and we're very optimistic and hopeful that President Obama might, take the lead.
Well, that was exciting. I was actually shocked because I did not know that you could be paid less than the minimum wage as a government contractor working on a government installation. I actually thought that was illegal, and the practice of paying them less than the minimum wage. Even if you're not a restaurant worker per se, I understand that this was taking place.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's far less than a living wage. Some of these workers are making $7.25 after 10 years of work in some of these federal buildings, with no sick days, reports of wage theft. So some of these workers are laboring under very unfair conditions, and President Obama has the opportunity to change this with an executive order for low-wage workers. So that's what we're hoping to make happen.
And so how are you pressuring the administration to get President Obama to actually sign this executive order?
So I believe we are up to 36 wonderful leaders in Congress who have signed on to this letter calling on him to do it. We also have, I believe, over 100,000 community co-sponsors of sort of grassroots members who are calling on him to do this. And for folks who are listening, if you're not sure if your member has signed on to this yet, you can find it at Teams to Win's website. And we can, I think everybody should call their member of Congress and ask them to sign on to call on Obama to pass this executive order.
Very good. We are actually being threatened with another government shutdown by Republicans who refuse to accept that the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is actually the law of the land. And they're actually threatening to shut down the government and actually also not authorize an extension of the debt ceiling, which would have devastating consequences. We would not be able to pay out Social Security, Medicare, I mean, you name it, all because they want to stop the Affordable Care Act from being implemented. What is your perspective, your take on why they seem insistent, like rabidly so, on denying what is the law of the land?
That is a great question. I don't know. It's like Groundhog Day, right? Like the government shutdown threat seems like it just keeps coming back over and over and over again, and so that's a reasonable option to move our democracy and our economy forward. So I can't totally speak to the psychology there because clearly it's causing huge problems for people all over the country. And I think the Affordable Care Act is the law of the land, and I'm not sure why they think shutting down the government is a valid response.
At the same time, we know that they have used these high-stakes negotiations to get the administration to actually fold on many important things. We've seen cuts to the pay of federal workers. We've seen other accommodations that have been made, all in the attempt of the Obama administration to placate congressional Republicans. Do you see a danger of this happening? And we already know that advocates of social insurance, at least, have been trying to fight the implementation of a chain CPI as a part of any kind of budget negotiations. But this has been set up already because the chain CPI cut to benefits, not just Social Security and Medicare, but for federal workers, retirees, and others, is baked into the president's budget this year. So what is the expectation? What is the Progressive Caucus doing to position themselves to fight that and win in this upcoming negotiation process?
Right. Well, I think those pushes to cut entitlements, to cut benefits that Americans rely on are going to be ongoing. And the administration in earlier rounds of negotiations like this has really tried to be, as you said, very accommodating to congressional Republicans' demands to cut some of the programs that build the middle class in this country. I think Progressive Caucus members know that these core programs are so invaluable, and any cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits really need to be off the table. So many of them put out statements, many of them have signed letters to organize against this, because that's not cutting our way to prosperity. It is not going to work.
Right.
So I think that's the core thing, fighting to protect those core programs. I do get the sense that perhaps the administration has seen this happen so many times that they're prepared to be a bit tougher in some of these negotiations, that they're prepared to hold strong, because they know that nothing they give up is going to be enough.
From your lips to God's ears, Amy, from your lips to God's ears, that the that the Obama administration actually stands firm, and that they not only talk the talk with regards to making sure that there are no negotiations around the debt ceiling, but also walk the walk in terms of protecting what's left of the American middle class and the New Deal and Great Society infrastructure. So, Annie, I understand that my friend Gabriela Lemus is now at Progressive Congress. Tell me about it.
Yes, she is our new fearless leader, our new executive director, and we are incredibly honored and excited to have her joining our team. So, as you probably know, she is most recently coming off a stint leading the Office of Public Engagement with the Department of Labor, working for Secretary Solis. And she just has an incredible breadth and depth of experience in fighting for some of those benefits programs for dignified and secure retirement, some of the programs we were speaking about earlier. She's done incredible work on climate change. So we are very honored to have her.
I know her actually from work around education. And when she was at LULAC, we did a lot of work around, how do we actually strengthen our public education system. And so I think that she's like well-rounded on a number of issues that are priority areas for the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So tell my friend congratulations for me.
Absolutely, and I'm sure she'd love to come on and talk with you sometime soon.
I look forward to having her. Give us your website, Annie.
Wonderful. So our website is www.progressivecongress.org, and there you can find up-to-date information on the fights to support low-wage workers, on the work that some of the members of the caucus are doing around protecting Social Security benefits, and more details about Dr. Loomis.
Very good. Until next time, Annie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loomis.
You are listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back after the break to talk about rape in America and around the world.
Americans of all ages and political parties agree they do not support cutting Social Security and Medicare benefits to pay for Washington's fiscal failures. Putting millions of middle-class and poor Americans and their families at risk in the name of deficit reduction is not fiscal responsibility. Social Security and Medicare strengthen our economy and our families. Call the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare at 1-800-966-1935 or visit us at thenationalcommittee.org. You can make a difference.
Social Security protects us against loss of income due to retirement, disability, or death. We pay into Social Security throughout our working lives, which is why we must stop Congress or the White House from cutting our earned benefits. Join our powerful national movement to protect Social Security for current and future generations. Call the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare at 1-800-966-1935 or visit us online at thenationalcommittee.org. You can make a difference.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I am your host, Maya Rockeymoore, and it is my pleasure to actually welcome to the show for the very first time ever, talking about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, Wagatwe. Wagatwe, welcome. Wagatwe Wanjuki. She is an activist around the issue of rape and sexual exploitation in this nation. Wagatwe, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How did you get involved in the issue of rape?
Actually, it occurred when I was a student at Tufts University, and I was a part of a peer education program, and it actually helped me realize about instances in my life where it really shed the light that I was a survivor of sexual violence. And when I reported, the process was so horrific that it made me an activist, because I realized what happened to me is not an isolated instance. Institutions all over the country and all over the world are not taking this issue seriously.
So I'm curious to know how the university responded in your case.
I think it would suffice to say that it was more of a non-response than a response. Unfortunately, I reported it to the school, and it was actually a part of a longer relationship that was involved with multiple instances of abuse, and I filed a report, and I met with the dean, and they said everything was okay, and as soon as I filed the report, they decided to pull back, and they said, oh, we're not sure if we're legally able to do anything about this, et cetera, et cetera. So they actually decided not to do anything after I already had prepared my statement and every met with the dean of students, etc.
So you're absolutely right. It is not an isolated incident. I actually myself have experienced it. When I was an undergrad, I actually had an instance of date rape. And what was interesting about it is that I did not have the language to even describe what happened to me. And I was so naive that I actually felt like, because I had had sex with this man, that I actually needed to enter into a relationship with him, because I thought that was only right, because I'd had this experience. Well, needless to say, in a relationship that started with violence actually ended with violence in my senior year when I tried to break up with this guy. He actually beat me and almost killed me. And so I was in the hospital. When I filed charges, the university actually tried to stop it from being from actually being entered into the books. I had to go to the university president to actually request that my charges and my statement be actually submitted to a higher authority than the university. And that was a fiasco. And I know that women around the country are still undergoing this. But get this, Wagatwe, I did not even have the language to describe what was happening to me until I got to grad school, became a professor of women's studies, got involved in Take Back the Night marches, and I didn't know that date rape, what happened to me was date rape. I didn't understand this dynamic. And I'm just realizing that we still have a long way to go. We have to find a way to institutionalize this kind of knowledge, because young women are coming up all along the way, and they are not getting it from popular culture. What can we do, Wagatwe?
I think a lot of it has to do with holding people accountable. So, for example, you had to go to the university president. The school is supposed to have taught you, technically from the get-go, what sexual violence is, because that's part of their job to reduce it. If students know what sexual violence is, they're, one, less likely to commit it, because they know that this is unacceptable and identifiable on the campus. And two, students like you and I, we didn't know about the language. We weren't able to label what happened to us, and so we don't report, and we end up being further in danger because we're amongst other students who feel okay with harming others.
Well, I mean, so you've got to, and I just think about the way I grew up and the things that I saw in the popular media, and date rape was not a term that was popularized back in the 80s. I think probably the 90s is when it came into. But now young women see, instances of rape being highlighted, whether it's in India or whether it's at the U.S. Naval Academy. And I'm just wondering, how they're internalizing this, and whether or not these high-profile instances are actually changing the culture at all.
I do, in a sense. I feel like the heightened coverage of the instances reflects our society's ability to notice that this issue is wrong, and now people are more willing to talk about it, not just survivors, but also media outlets, which I think is great progress. However, media also has songs like Blurred Lines, right, that has very problematic lyrics that normalize sexual violence and pushing the bar in terms of, sometimes coercing young women or women of any age into sexual acts that they don't want. So I think it is a two-pronged issue. We need to get past attacking folks who say that, oh, this issue, it's just a song, et cetera, ignore it, because, in fact, I'm sure you know this, our media impacts our culture and what people think and their education and what they know. So we need to approach this from a multi-pronged strategy.
That's right. So I like the idea of mandating this intake, if you will, for college students, maybe in the freshman year. But what do we do about high school students? Children are getting more and more sexually active at younger and younger ages. How do we ensure that schools have the right kind of training? And it's not just for young women. I would argue that men need to learn how to treat women. they need to know how their acts, because they keep doing the same thing, having these acts of sexual violence, taping it, putting it on the internet, and getting in trouble. And so it just strikes me that young men, aren't getting the message either, and that there are no institutionalized ways to actually make sure that they know the deal.
Right. We definitely need to teach everyone to respect one another. And also, it's important to point out that, men can be survivors too, and sometimes women can be perpetrators, and sometimes sexual violence occurs between same-sex people. But I think that I'm a part of a campaign called Know Your 9, which is designed to educate students about their right under it. And Title 9 is basically a law that requires schools that receive public funding, so that includes not just colleges and universities, but also high schools. They're supposed to properly prevent and respond to sexual violence when it has to deal with their students. So high schools also have this responsibility to teach what sexual violence is. I think when we consider sex education, I think that's also a great opportunity to really teach about consent and, knowing that you can say no. And if someone doesn't say no, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're saying yes as well.
Right. So you're saying that the law is there, it just needs to be enforced.
Correct. That's one of the light bulbs that I had when I was a student at Tufts. I was fortunate enough to have a student who was taking a class on gender and the law, and she told me about the existence of Title IX, and she told me, she was like, Tufts University is supposed to first of all, you have the right to file this complaint, and also the law says that they're supposed to help you and accommodate you academically. Women are the majority of college students now. And sexual violence is a very real threat when it's between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 who are survivors by the time they graduate or their graduating age. So this has a very real impact economically, socially, because I know I lost my access to school, and that's going to have an impact on my life forever.
You lost your access to school? What happened? You left?
They actually ended up kicking me out.
Wow.
When I started speaking about what was happening, and they used my poor grades because I was involved in an abusive relationship for 2 years, they said that I was better off at home, and I actually only had 1 year left before graduating.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you ever challenged that?
I did file a Title IX complaint against the school, but that centered more so on them not initially properly responding to my student judicial complaint against my perpetrator.
And can you tell me what happened to your perpetrator? Did he finish school?
Oh, he finished on time. I'm 20. How old am I? I'm 26. I'm almost 27. I'm still a college student. I'm balancing working and being in school at the same time. I still have student loans from a school that didn't care that I was raped, that I'm paying every month. It's a very, I feel like we're talking more about sexual violence on campuses, but we're not talking about the consequences of it not being properly addressed. So I'm living that reality where I'm struggling financially. I still have to pay a student loan that can be triggering at times. And, it really holds folks back in a lot of cases.
Let me just give you what I did is I had one more semester left before graduation. I basically pressed for him to be kicked out of school, so that, and I basically leveraged the campus code of honor code to push for that, and there was also a process for a campus review comprised of a jury of students. But with that, to get him kicked out of school for the last semester while I could finish in safety and peace. And that's the way it went down. And so, I think we have to realize that these universities are trying to avoid having to report instances of violence as a part of their federal requirement under a specific law, and anything they can do to derail their reporting requirements of instances of violence, whether that be rape, sexual violence, or otherwise, they do. So it's good to know. What is the status of your campaign right now?
So So we just recently launched, and it's been going very well. There's been students from across the country and groups, and even some folks from administration who've reached out who want to launch their own mini campaign associated with us. So that's been going extremely well. And we also have an associated campaign called Ed Act Now, where we gave a petition to the Department of Education and Secretary Duncan about more enforcing Title IX more effectively, because as we've already spoken about before, schools are not opting to do the right thing more often. It's really troubling, and it seems like we're going to have to use the law and the government to really show that, hey, you need to take this seriously. Stop caring more about potential rapists than caring about your victims.
Wagatwe Wanjuki, can you give us your website?
Sure. So if you want to check out about Know Your Nine, just go to knowyour1x.org, and you can learn more about the campaign and learn more about the law and how it can help you or a loved one.
Ms. Wanjuki, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back with more Pivot Point, and we'll be joined by Congresswoman Barbara Lee of the great state of California. Stay tuned.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore, and it is my delight to introduce a great woman, U.S. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, representing California's 13th Congressional District. She is from the Bay Area, Oakland specifically. Welcome, Congresswoman.
Delighted to be with you.
And I should also mention a great friend of mine. I admire you so greatly. Congresswoman, I know that we're supposed to be talking about Medicare and SNAP, but can you indulge me just 1 second? I would love for you to weigh in on where you think we are now with the Syria situation.
Sure. I think that, the progress that's being made on the diplomatic front, I believe it's real, but I'm very cautiously optimistic that we'll achieve the outcomes. I think that many of us were opposed to the use of force and really asked the president to come to Congress, and he quite naturally knew that would be the appropriate thing to do for a debate, and he did the right thing. I think what has happened now has shown that, tough diplomacy can work, but again, we have to be cautiously optimistic that it will work. One thing that I want to make sure is clear, that no one believes that the Assad regime should get off the hook. I mean, we need to bring this man and his regime to justice. The use of chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons have no place in a civilized world. And so there's the International Criminal Court. There are a variety of mechanisms that the world body needs to put in place, needs to, I'd say, comply with to bring him to justice. But also we need to recognize that there's no military solution to the conflict in Syria, and that to get to a negotiated settlement, I believe, like many of us believe here in the House, that the use of force would lead us further away from that. So we have to, support our president, the Secretary of State, and hope that they will use this time, and I think they're doing it properly, to engage in diplomacy to achieve the outcome that we all want to see.
Very good. And I think the American people, the polls show that the American people actually support the actions of the administration of not going it alone, of deferring to Congress, and then entering into a negotiation of diplomacy. So the broad support is out there. But speaking of violence, it's hard for me to say that chemical weapons are more important than weapons of violence perpetrated by conventional weapons, especially when we see a shooter go and kill 12 people at the Navy shooting yard, that we see this violence taking place all across the world with bombs, with guns, and certainly with drones. And so for me, my question is, how do we eradicate this culture of violence that we seem to have embraced? And I think that we only reinforce when we actually try to make a distinction between violence wrought by chemical weapons and violence wrought by other types of forms of violence.
Yes, Maya, that's a very profound and important insight, and I'm glad you raised that, because our young people, see, first, our own country responding to many situations with violence. They understand that, and they see what's taking place in the media. We can't pass gun safety, gun control legislation, so guns and the use of guns, it's almost like the norm now. Mm-hmm. And so this culture of violence is exactly what it is. And what we have to do is begin to recognize, and I have legislation calling for a Department of Peace building, which a lot of people, and I'm building co-sponsorship for this, because we have to look at strategies to achieve peace, not only throughout the world, but here in our own country. When you look at gun violence, when you look at domestic violence, when you look at violence that's perpetrated in families, when people are stressed out and can't get a job. I mean, oftentimes people, my background is in mental health, and oftentimes people are pushed to the edge, and if they're vulnerable and have issues, God knows what could happen. And so we have to have a culture that allows for a comprehensive approach to violence prevention, which involves all of these pieces. And in my legislation, we do that, and we recognize that this culture of violence has to be addressed in a comprehensive way.
What is the bill number for that?
I'd have to get it from my office. I'm really
that's okay. That's cool.
Sorry, I don't have the bill number. But
we'll find out, and we'll continue to promote that, because I think you're absolutely right. I think that the situation here in Washington on Monday with the shooting at the Navy Yard is just yet another reminder that it's comprehensive, that mental health issues have to be addressed as well, and that we have to also address, the access to these weapons. So, to the issue of SNAP. Food stamps. You actually lived on, was it $4.10 a day?
Yeah. Well, man, $4.50 a day is about what the SNAP recipient receives at this point, and I lead the effort to take the food stamp challenge. This third year we've done it in Congress, and we do this to dramatize and to raise the public attention on what is taking place, and it's very difficult to live off of $4.50 a day. It's an unhealthy way to live, and the challenges are many. But you know what? I'm off of it in a week. There are millions of Americans who see no end in sight. Right. And now with these horrific cuts, it's going to even be worse for people. And I do have to say, I was on food stamps when I was in college, raising my two kids, trying to struggle through to get an education, take care of the kids, try to find a job. So I know what's taking place with people who are just on the edge. No one wants to be on food stamps. It's a bridge over troubled waters, like it was for me. And so until we create jobs, we need to understand that people deserve to eat and don't need to be on their SNAP benefits, don't need to be on the chopping block like they are this week with the Republican Tea Party proposed $40 billion nutrition assistance cut.
So can you tell me what their psychology is? You have a background in mental health. Help me here. They seem to want to do away with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, delinking it from the Farm Bill and seeking to cut it even further. And why is that? Because their constituents actually need this.
Yeah. It's hard to say why it is. It's just that, there's some who believe that this is a survival of the fittest country. They believe that only the strong shall survive, the weak shall perish, and if you need a little bit of help, then perhaps, you don't deserve to live the American dream. I really, quite frankly, don't understand it, because it's un-American. Those are not our values as a country, Maya. It's un-American and it's immoral. I mean, come on, people, the safety net, food safety, nutrition assistance, hunger, all of those issues are issues that speak to the core of who we are as Americans. And to want to cut seniors, children, veterans from eating, stop them from eating, that's wrong. It's immoral. And people need to understand who's doing this and recognize that we have elections next year.
Well, in the context of these same people being okay with huge subsidies for wealthy multinational farmers, or huge tax breaks for wealthy corporations and millionaires and billionaires, and also happy with having an expanded Pentagon budget, military budget. Yet when it comes to the issue of food security, when it comes to the social safety net, when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, they're willing to shut the government down. They're willing to default on the nation's debt. They're willing to stop payments on all of these programs that are vital and essential for Americans because they have a problem with people getting access to care, access to food, access to income supports. Where are we? Can you give us a sense of where you think we are as a nation right now, and what is the status of our democracy?
Yeah, Maya, and that troubles me tremendously because I don't think this Tea Party Congress and these members reflect the majority of the American people. The American people are generous. They know that, yes, government is there not for handouts, but to provide the foundation or a safety net so people don't fall through. Members from the Tea Party really believe that those at the top, the 1%, are the ones that this country should support. I mean, you talk about farm subsidies, you talk about crop insurance, you're talking about corporate CEO compensation. I mean, you know, income inequality is growing.
Right.
And we're in a country now where we have the very rich and the very poor.
So, Congresswoman, you have been a leader of the Congressional Black Caucus. You have been a leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. What is the strategy to fight back?
I'm telling now the WHIP task force on poverty and opportunity. The strategy is election. I tell you, we have got to take back our House so we can have a Speaker of the House and the Senate and the White House that understands our priorities should be putting people first rather than politics. And so elections, for me, is what we have to do. In the meantime, we're working on our legislative agenda to cut poverty in half in 10 years. We have to make sure that we just maintain the safety net. And right now, in the House, the Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, and our Tri-Caucus, and our Democrat Caucus, we're the resistance movement. We've got to resist any more of these draconian cuts. But we also have an agenda to create jobs, and that's what it's going to take, creating jobs if we're going to eliminate poverty. But again, we have to have elections next November, which will put in members of Congress who really do put people first.
So really paying attention to the midterm elections, mobilizing people now, linking the issues to the election cycle so that people understand that this is not just about personalities, it's about lives.
Absolutely, and that's why we see voter restriction laws and the Voting Rights Act under assault, because they don't want people to vote. They want to take away our democratic right to vote so they can keep and maintain their right-wing extremist agenda.
Well, Congresswoman, I want to thank you for your leadership. You have time and again proved that you are willing to stand for your convictions, that you are willing to stand by your constituents, and that you are willing to stand up for America. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you for all the work you do to protect our seniors and Social Security and communities informed about what the real issues are of the day. Thank you again. It's really good to be with you.
Thank you. Take care. So thanks also to our listening audience for joining us for yet another edition of Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. Our sponsor is the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. And you may remember when we started the show a year ago, we were going to focus our year with this sponsorship focused on aging issues related to social insurance, Social Security, Medicare. And we're coming up on the end of that year, and I want to give a special shout out to the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare for being such a fantastic partner in the inaugural year of Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. I'd also like to thank my producers, Peter James Callahan and Melissa Byrne. They are a fantastic team, strengthening our show on a weekly basis. And of course, always to all of you listening out there, thank you for giving your support. Please join us every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. In the Washington, D.C. area, you can listen to us on 1480 a.m. And around the nation and the world, you can check us out at weactradio.com. Until next time, America.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
When I started working decades ago, I didn't know anything about Social Security or Medicare. I was too busy earning a living, buying a house, and raising a family. But life has a way of surprising us. A death in my family and disability first introduced me to Social Security. I'm counting on it when I retire, and thanks to Medicare, I know I'll have the health care I need in retirement. Social Security and Medicare are vital to millions of American families. They also contribute hundreds of billions of dollars to our economy each year. So why are some in Washington threatening benefit cuts to reduce the deficit? It makes no sense. Benefit cuts for the middle class and tax breaks for the wealthy is not fiscal responsibility. It's bad for our economy and even worse for our families. That's why I joined the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Together, we're working to ensure Washington strengthens the programs we paid into throughout our working lives. Call 1-800-966-1935 or visit online at thenationalcommittee.org. We can make a difference.
Americans of all ages and political parties agree they do not support cutting Social Security and Medicare benefits to pay for Washington's fiscal failures. Putting millions of middle class and poor Americans and their families at risk in the name of deficit reduction is not fiscal responsibility. Social Security and Medicare strengthen our economy and our families. Call the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare at 1-800-966-1935 or visit us at thenationalcommittee.org. You can make a difference.
Social Security protects us against loss of income due to retirement, disability, or death. We pay into Social Security throughout our working lives, which is why we must stop Congress or the White House from cutting our earned benefits. Join our powerful national movement to protect Social Security for current and future generations. Call the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare at 1-800-966-1935 or visit us online at thenationalcommittee.org. You can make a difference.
When I started working decades ago, I didn't know anything about Social Security or Medicare. I was too busy earning a living, buying a house, and raising a family. But life has a way of surprising us. A death in my family and disability first introduced me to Social Security. I'm counting on it when I retire, and thanks to Medicare, I know I'll have the health care I need in retirement. Social Security and Medicare are vital to millions of American families. They also contribute hundreds of billions of dollars to our economy each year. So why are some in Washington threatening benefit cuts to reduce the deficit? It makes no sense. Benefit cuts for the middle class and tax breaks for the wealthy is not fiscal responsibility. It's bad for our economy and even worse for our families. That's why I joined the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Together, we're working to ensure Washington strengthens the programs we paid into throughout our working lives. Call 1-800-966-1935 or visit online at thenationalcommittee.org. We can make a difference.
Toilet Plus always makes me think of the TPP.
The TPP? What's that, Toilet Paper Plus?
No, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
What the heck is that?
It's the biggest trade deal in history, and it's being negotiated in secret right now.
So?
So, if it passes Congress, it's going to affect everything we care about.
How can that be? I'm not making any deals with foreign countries.
The TPP is a backroom deal for multinational corporations that will give them control over our laws even at the local level. It will make food less safe, allow corporations to pollute more, raise the cost of medications, take away our internet freedom, ship more jobs overseas, and more.
Wow, I want to know more about that. What can we do about it?
Go to flushthetpp.org and take the pledge.
And then what?
Then you can join the actions in D.C. starting on September 21st to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
What do I have to do?
There's something for everyone to do. Talk to your neighbors about it, march and rally, hand out information, be part of the Fair Trade Brigade in Congress, and more.
That sounds like fun.
It is fun, but this is serious work. The TPP will give greater power to big corporations to profit with impunity, but we can stop them.
Okay, I can do that. I'm going to go to flushthetpp.org right now.
This is the Working Virginia Update. I'm Jesse Russell. President Barack Obama is on a collision course with organized labor over the Affordable Care Act. At last week's AFL-CIO Constitutional Convention in Los Angeles, a resolution was passed calling on the Obama administration to address concerns that the act would detrimentally impact union health care plans. Those plans aren't eligible for subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, and unions are concerned that could lead to employers kicking 20 million Americans off of union plans and into the exchanges. On Friday, Labor received its response from the administration. There will be no exceptions. Ezra Klein reported Friday that a senior White House official told him there was no way to make a legal exception for the plans under the act, because those plans aren't open to anyone who wants to buy in.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.